we're going to go back on the record in State versus McIver. Deputy Murphy, if you would please swear in Dr. Sellers. Dr. Sellers, good morning. Need you to stand back up.
If you will, raise your right hand.
There's something weird going on with the PA. What's going on in the chambers as well. Okay. So.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear and affirm that the testimony you should give the court today is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Yes, if you will, please have a seat. Get as close to the mic as possible during your testimony. For the purposes of the court's record, please state and spell your name.
Marty Sellers, Martysellers.
All right, before we get started, has that been stopped?
It has. I haven't had any of the systems do, but I also paused the actual playing.
Great. All right. So, is this your witness, Ms. Congress? All right. Then I'll sit down. And again, the limited purpose for having Dr. Sellers in here outside the presence of the jury, as I'm recalling, is to establish Dr. Sellers' familiarity with this matter and the basis of that familiarity.
Sure.
Okay.
Good morning, Dr. Sellers.
Good morning.
If you would, just kind of introduce yourself to the court and tell them what you do, just generally, so he has an idea of who you are.
All right. Again, my name is Marty Sellers. I am a surgeon at Emory University, specializing in transplant, but I was on general surgery call the night in question. So I'm a surgeon at Emory.
Okay. On September the 25th of 2016, at some point, do you receive a call that brings you to Emory to operate as a result of being in on-call status?
Yes.
And are you actually one of the physicians who operate on Tex McIver?
Yes.
After that operation, once you complete sort of your involvement that evening at the hospital with her surgery and attempts to save her life, do you leave the hospital?
Eventually, yes.
Okay. It's sort of your primary involvement there that night, the surgery and the attempts to save her life.
That's correct.
Once you leave, do you have any other involvement in Mr. McIver's treatment or anything else there at the hospital that night?
Well, after surgery is completed, the responsibility is on us to inform the family of the outcome of the surgery.
And once you're done with that part of your responsibilities, does that complete your medical involvement there at the hospital that night?
It does.
For that early morning. Do you tell the court, just so we can all get an idea of once this happens on September 26, 2016, do you continue to stay involved in any way in the investigation or anything going on with the case?
No.
Do you follow the case in the media?
Peripherally, by when people come to me in the hall and say, did you hear this or did you see this? And so actively, no.
Okay. Any conversations about the case while it's pending as far as detailed content about what people said or what people heard at the hospital the night that this happened?
No.
Once the case began, were you actually following the case before it began, before the trial itself began?
No.
And once it began, tell the court how it is that this sort of got back on your radar.
Well, I was about to go to bed one night and my wife said the jury selection for that trial is about to start or is ongoing. And I said, okay, thank you, and thought, well, I was, based on some conversations that I had heard from other people at the hospital, I thought I would be contacted. I was basically asked by several people, have you been contacted yet? And I just kept saying no because I had not. And so I was a little bit surprised that the trial was going on, but again, it didn't really register to me that...
Fair to say that you thought it was kind of unusual that you hadn't been contacted yet?
I guess just based on the fact that I was the attending surgeon and other people in the hospital had said they had been subpoenaed, I was, again, I wasn't, I guess, surprised, but I don't know what to say, but I was a little bit surprised that my wife said that the jury selection was ongoing, and I thought, well, I haven't heard anything, so I thought that might be a good thing.
Okay. And at some point after your wife told you that jury selection began, did you then reach out to David Latner?
I did.
Tell the court who that is.
Honestly, I think he's not an Emory attorney, but he was the outside counsel that was retained just for witness preparation, I would guess. I don't know, honestly don't know his official involvement.
Okay, but coordinating with some of the doctors and staff, as far as you know.
Correct.
As it relates to contact with the DA's office.
Yes.
Okay. Did you ever contact, you yourself call anybody from the DA's office directly?
No.
And at some point, do you then receive a call from Mr. Rucker and myself, other attorneys in the office?
Yes.
At any point after this initial sort of flag from your wife that the jury selection is ongoing, do you actually tune into the trial, watch the live stream, anything like that?
No.
At any point, did you follow media coverage while the trial was ongoing?
No, I didn't follow anything. I had seen, someone had sent me an article that had AJC, it was in the AJC, so I got on the AJC website, and the lead article on the front, or the home page, was this trial, and it was the day that there were guns in the courtroom. I just remember seeing a picture of the guns, but other than that, I haven't kept up with it.
Okay, did you actually read the article itself?
No.
And as outside of that article and your wife sort of drawing your attention to the jury selection, does that sort of summarize your media contact as far as since this trial has been ongoing?
It does.
And have you talked to any of the witnesses from Emory Hospital or anywhere else who have testified as to the specific detailed content of their testimony?
No, other than getting a text from Dr. Hardy saying that she was coming to testify and wanted to know if I was coming to testify.
Is what you just told the court sort of the same outline of the involvement that you gave to me as well?
Yes.
Did he tell Ms. Convery the same thing recently that he just told us about his connection to the case? He said, yes, I told you the same thing that everyone just heard here.
He'll tell me.
We'll see.
And Dr. Sellers, anything about any of the media coverage that you've experienced in any way, whether it's seeing a picture, glancing at an article, or hearing something from your wife or any other employees that affects in any way your recollection of the events that occurred on the 25th and 26th of September 2016?
No.
The information you provided to us and that's been transcribed and we've had an opportunity to review, is that information and the testimony that you anticipate potentially giving to this jury, things that are based on your personal experience and recollection of what took place in the hospital that evening?
Yes.
I don't have any other questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Samuel, any questions for Dr. Sellers in connection with this area we're exploring?
I just want to clarify, you've talked to no nurses or other than the text from Dr. Hardy, no other discussion with anybody who's been 20 different nurses and technicians and doctors and valets. You have an intern, or even Dr. Saeed, anybody since March 5th about this case?
March 5th, no.
All right. I'm comfortable ruling now, but if you want to have a discussion outside Dr. Sellers' presence, we can do that.
I don't need a discussion.
Okay. I'm going to allow Dr. Sellers to testify. You have preserved, I believe, your objection to some of the content of his testimony. You're welcome to renew it if he's asked about it, but that certainly is preserved. We had a pretty lengthy discussion before we took our break last Friday, 2 Fridays ago, about the concern you had about Dr. Sellers' recollection about what Mr. McIver said. So,
well, there's only 2 things I'd say. First off, I did confirm with the assistant DA, but I want to make sure the witness knows and the ADA knows that you posed some limits. And second, there was a motion of limine granted, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, it seems like, about doctors or nurses giving any opinions about demeanor, as opposed to, this is my observation.
sure.
And his transcript, you've got a copy, I gave it to you Friday, is nothing wrong with it, but when he was interviewed by the DA staff and Ms. Griffin and all, it's just chock full of opinions. Again, nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But I want to make sure that he knows he can't offer any opinions, even if the question seems like it may be eliciting it. I know that the ADA wouldn't be eliciting it because it would violate your granting of motion limiting as to medical professionals giving opinions about someone else's demeanor as opposed to simply observing what the demeanor is.
Sure. So those are well taken, both those reminders, one from many years ago, one more recent. So Dr. Sellers, it may well be that Ms. Convery, one of her colleagues, talked to you about this. It's perfectly appropriate for either side to ask you, what did you see, what was going on, what were your observations? The distinction that we're making here is that you limit your testimony when asked that kind of question. What did you see the defendant do? I saw him do X, and not add to it, and boy, he sure seemed angry to me, or I was surprised he didn't seem upset, and I would expect someone to be upset in this situation. Now, if you are confronted with that question, were you surprised that he was not upset? Then everyone will have a chance to object, and if I overrule the objection, then you'd be able to answer it. But in particular, from the state, you'll get open-ended questions, and there are two constraints that I have imposed on the answers to open-ended questions to everyone who was testifying from the hospital. One for everyone, which was, please don't include your opinion as to whether someone seemed upset or not, or if it was odd to you, because that's not how you would expect someone to react. That everyone needed to stay away from. In addition, for you, I entered a ruling that said that the state ought not to elicit from you any physical description of your colleagues. Syed, that's the name, Dr. Syed. And so I'm confident that that won't be something Ms. Convery asks you. I want to be just as confident that that's not something that you would inadvertently say. The caveat to that might be, and I don't control what either side does, but if you are then explicitly asked that by Mr. Samuel, there'll probably be a pause and everyone's eyes will get wide. But I will allow you to answer it if it is asked by the defense. But I want to be clear what I'm saying here. If you are asked an open-ended question by the defense, you need to stay away from those two areas. Don't offer an opinion as to whether it seemed someone's reaction seemed appropriate to you or anything like that. And also, please don't share with the jury any physical description of your colleague. If you are asked point blank, describe Dr. Syed, then we're all going to pause and say, are you sure you meant to ask that? I didn't mean to ask that. And I will tell you, you may answer that question. Short of that extraordinary circumstance that I don't expect to arise, I need you to stay away from those two areas. Does that make sense?
Understood.
Any questions?
No.
Anything else, Mr. Samuel?
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay. Are we ready for the jury?
Yes.
Let's bring them in. I bet they're ready for us.
Your Honor, while we're waiting for the jury's opinion, I am going to request the court to publish the stipulation prior to Dr. Sellers' testimony. Is it still in here? Do you want him to step out while you read?
Be right there. I need it though.
It's right there.
You still ready, Judge?
We are.
All rise for the jury.
It's not initial.
Our jurors are present and accounted for, Judge.
Thank you. You all can be seated. Welcome back. This is Dr. Sellers. He's going to introduce himself to you guys in just a moment. You can take a seat, Dr. Sellers. He's already been sworn in outside his presence because we had to work through a few things. But before we hear from Dr. Sellers, we have another stipulation that I'm going to read into the record. The state and the defendant stipulate that Ms. Alicia Redding previously worked at the DeKalb Medical Center for 10 years and Northside Hospital for 7 years. In July of 2016, Ms. Alicia Redding began working for the emergency department at Emory University Healthcare. During the month of September 2016, Alicia Redding was employed as a nurse technician at the Clifton Road campus of Emory University Hospital. Some of her responsibilities at the time included patient care activities like drawing blood, inserting IVs and catheters, and setting fractures. When a patient enters the emergency department, they go through triage. Then they would see Alicia Redding or someone in her role, and then ultimately a doctor. On September 25, 2016, Ms. Redding was assigned as a nurse technician covering rooms 11 through 19 in the emergency department. Upon hearing about a gunshot patient in the emergency room, Ms. Redding went to the trauma room to attempt to assist in any way she could. Ms. Redding remembers being in the trauma room when Tex McIver first arrived and being there for approximately 25 minutes. She recalls that Terry Sullivan, Natalie Mosher, Nicole Smith, Allison Neely, and another tech were in the trauma room at the same time she responded. She does not remember seeing the defendant or Danny Joe Carter in the trauma room at any point. After Ms. Redding left the trauma room, she went back to rooms 11 through 19 and was standing in the area between rooms 11 through 14 near the family waiting room. Nurse Terry Sullivan approached Ms. Redding and explained that she heard the husband, the lady, and the lawyer talking. But since Ms. Sullivan cannot hear that well in one ear, Ms. Redding was asked to stand closer to see if she could hear what they were saying. Ms. Redding moved closer to the group of people Nurse Sullivan referenced and recalls the husband saying, "What am I going to do? What am I going to say?" Then Ms. Redding hears Mr. Maple say, "I'm going to prep you on this stuff." Ms. Redding hears the lawyer ask if they were arguing. The husband says that they were not arguing. Ms. Redding also hears the husband say, "In a shady area of town, holding gun in my lap." Ms. Redding does not see the female in the group say anything. Ms. Redding also recalls seeing the defendant and Danny Joe Carter on the phone at some point. Later, Ms. Alicia Redding approached a police officer, initially noticed by Nurse Sullivan, and gave the officer her name and phone number, and told him what she saw and heard. Ms. Redding later saw the defendant checking himself into triage and heard him say, "I need to check myself in. My wife just died." Ms. Redding is able to observe the defendant go to triage, and later she sees Ms. Carter, the defendant, and the lawyer leave the hospital together. I will make this a court's exhibit, and we can proceed. Ms. Convery, if you have questions for Dr. Sellers, who again has already been sworn in.
Am I supposed to introduce myself to the jury?
You're going to follow directions from here on out.
I will.
Question.
I will do my best.
All right.
Introduce yourself, Dr. Sellers, to the jurors again and tell them where you currently work.
My name is Marty Sellers. I am a surgeon at Emory University.
And how long have you been a surgeon for Emory University?
Since June of 2016.
Okay. Tell the jury a little bit about your background and training that allows you to do that job.
Specifically, I finished training in general surgery and then the transplant surgery fellowship. And as part of my responsibilities, at least at the time, was to included general surgical.
And so you started with Emory University in June of 2016?
Correct.
Where were you working before Emory?
At the most recent had been the University of Pittsburgh.
Okay. And how long were you with the University of Pittsburgh?
Just for 7 months while I was waiting for the contract negotiations to be completed with Emory.
And prior to that?
Piedmont Hospital here in Atlanta since October of 2005.
Right. And while you're working for Piedmont, Pittsburgh, and Emory, were you a surgeon, same type of surgeon? Or did you have different fields of specialty?
Predominantly transplant and liver-related, non-transplant liver-related surgery.
Okay. And in your capacity with Emory in 2016, were you a transplant surgeon there?
No.
What were you?
General surgeon.
Okay. Tell the jurors, what does it mean to be a general surgeon at Emory in that capacity that you worked in?
In addition to general surgery, I did non-transplant related liver surgery. But responsibilities include being on call for emergency room consults, inpatient consults, and seeing patients in clinic that have general surgery problems like hernias, gallbladder problems, things like that.
And in your time at Emory, tell the jury a little bit about what it means to be on call, just what that means for your purposes when you're an on-call surgeon and you're actually on call.
Being on call means that any consult or patient that comes in to the emergency room or someone that's already admitted to the hospital, if their primary care team has a question that is a surgical issue, then I am the attending that covers that patient.
And what are the hours that you're on call at that time?
That was a weekend, so from Friday night at 5 o'clock until Monday morning at 6.
Anytime a call comes in, you're subject to having to come.
Correct.
What part of, let me ask you this. Tell the jurors, what is the difference between a resident and an attending?
A resident is someone that is still in their training, being supervised by someone like myself who is an attending.
And in September of 2016, were you an attending?
Yes.
And when did you first become board certified in medicine?
Board certification in general surgery, September 9th, 1996.
And prior to working for Piedmont, were you still in the Atlanta area, or is it Piedmont Hospital that brought you down here to Atlanta?
I was at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, in Children's Hospital there, so Piedmont brought me to Atlanta.
Let's tell the jurors of September 25th, 2016, were you working as an on-call surgeon in the same capacity we've been talking about for Emory Hospital?
Yes.
And do you remember that particular weekend, whether or not it was a busy weekend for you?
I remember because of what happened Sunday night. I was going to bed and remember thinking, this has been a fairly light weekend. I had done one case the day before, and a person I think that had had a perforated ulcer on Saturday morning, and other than that had probably a few consults, but did not have any surgery cases.
And sometime that night on Sunday evening, after you thought, oh, it's been quiet, did you get a call?
Within a couple of minutes, I got a phone call from Dr. Syed.
Okay, tell the jurors about what time that phone call came in.
It was 10:57.
And how is it that you remember that precise time, 10:57?
I'm strange in a lot of ways, and one of the things I can remember is numbers. So I do, and that's a phone call that sort of gets indelibly imprinted on my mind anyway, but I do specifically remember it was 22:57.
And you said you got the call from who?
From Dr. Syed.
And who is Dr. Syed?
He was the administrative chief resident at Emory, and meaning he was in his last year of training, and he had been called by Dr. Razavi, who I guess at the time was a second-year resident, about there being a gunshot wound in the emergency room.
And so the news about a gunshot wound makes its way to you. Do you have a particular reaction to learning that there's a gunshot wound at Emory?
My immediate reaction was I have to go. I mean, I didn't really think, I didn't overthink it.
Had you responded to a gunshot wound or been involved in a gunshot surgery at Emory before?
Not at Emory, no. Other than, I'll just qualify that with, as a transplant surgeon, you do a lot of organ procurements, and some of those patients might have been gunshot victims, I'm not sure.
But as far as dealing with the real-time trauma of a gunshot wound?
That's the first.
So you got to get there as quick as possible, I would imagine. Tell the jurors, what part of town were you in or were you living in when you got the call?
In Sandy Springs, about 25, 30 minutes away.
And after receiving that call at 10:57, what is the next thing that you do?
Get up, get dressed, and get in the car to go.
And do you have an idea in your mind about how long it takes you to get from the Sandy Springs area to Emory Hospital?
That time on a Sunday night traffic is light, I would guess 20 minutes.
At the time that you got the phone call from Dr. Saeed, did you, aside from learning that there was a gunshot wound, did you have an idea as to the status of the patient?
I had an idea because he had told me he had done the emergency room thoracotomy where he had opened the chest in the ER, and that in and of itself indicates a patient in extremis.
Why do you say that?
Because that's a last-ditch effort that people undertake in order to save someone's life in the emergency room once they lose consciousness or lose a pulse.
And I think you said, but just so the jury understands, what is you said a thoracotomy? What is that?
That's when you open the chest for any reason, but in this circumstance it was done to put a clamp on the main blood vessel leading out of the heart so that the blood pressure could stay high enough to perfuse the brain.
In the 20-25 minutes it takes you, do you arrive at some point safely to Emory Hospital?
I do.
What do you do when you pull up there?
Our parking lot is far enough away to where I didn't want to take that time, so I drove into the valet area at the ER and gave them my keys and ran up to the operating room.
And do you go straight from valet area up into the OR itself?
Yes.
I'm going to show you some photographs that have been previously shown to the defense counsel. It's going to be State's Exhibit 500 through 508 sequentially. Take a look at these one. Do you recognize those?
Yes.
And how do you recognize those exhibits or those pictures?
They are the entrance into the surgery waiting room and hence into the operating room, and the last two pictures were of the consult room where we spoke.
Okay. And our State's Exhibit 500 through 508, and all of those areas, a fair and accurate depiction of how those areas actually appear in the hospital itself.
Yes.
I'm going to tender 500 through 508.
No objection, they are all admitted.
State's Exhibit 500. Tell the jurors what we're looking at in 500.
That is the elevator where patients and family will get off immediately in front of the surgery waiting room reception desk.
Okay. And are these the elevators that you take to get into the OR, or you take a different?
Oh no, I take the stairs. Especially, every time I take the stairs, but especially that.
Okay, and is this the emergency room? I'm going to show you 502. Is this one level up from the emergency room entrance where you would have come in valet?
This is the surgery waiting area, and the operating room is on floor 3, and the ER is on floor 1.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit. Well, in State's Exhibit 502, is this sort of, we'll just tell the jury what we're looking at in 502.
This is the view that I would have seen coming straight out of the stairwell, and I would have gone into, I don't know how to point.
You can just press on the screen.
You touch the screen, it should register
Press
your
hard,
finger,
though.
but we were,
So I would immediately come out of, this would be exactly what I was looking at coming out of the stairwell, and I would be heading towards that door to go through to get to the dressing room to get changed in the scrubs.
And State's Exhibit 503. What do we see in State's 503?
That is the entrance into the operating room. Beyond these two double doors here, you have to have cap, mask, etc.
Closer look at State's 504.
Closer view, yes.
Once you actually make your way, and are these the set of doors, once you're kind of scrubbed up, ready to go in, this is how you actually enter in to the surgical area?
Once you have your scrubs on, yes, you actually, the scrub sink is beyond these doors.
And what can we see in State's 505?
This looks like the
This might help. 506.
close up, yes. This is these are the double doors that we were just talking about that are now open into the operating room area.
And in State's Exhibit 506, do you actually see the room where you operated?
Yes, 21.
So you told the jury that you make your way in and you go through the process to sort of get scrubbed up so you can go in. Once you actually make your way into the operating room, tell the jury what's going on in there.
Well, there's a bustle of activity. The patient's already asleep on the operating table. Dr. Syed had appropriately previously or made the incision by the time I had gotten there. And there was just activity that you would expect in someone that was struggling to survive.
And so had the surgery itself and the actual attempt to save her life already began before you get into the operating room?
Of course, yes.
And why is it that he is able to do that, a resident is able to do that before an attending arrives?
Well, at his level of training, he would be expected to be able to do that. I mean, every chief resident in the country would be expected to do that. And Dr. Syed is especially talented, so it would be, I was not surprised at all that he had started when I got there.
About what time, best estimate, would you have come into the operating room to actually begin your involvement in the surgery itself?
I would guess by the time everything transpired for me to get into the operating room would have been 11:30.
Once inside the operating room and you're involved enough and caught up to speed, are you able to tell the jurors about what was some of the damage that you noticed right away as a result of the gunshot wound?
Just a lot of blood everywhere, including on surgical pads or gauzes that had been placed in to evacuate some of the blood. And then the patient's open with the midline incision made.
I'm going to show you a thin mark and show you that's happening. The State's Exhibit 511 and 512. Take a look at this for me. You recognize both of those?
Yes.
And our State's Exhibit 511 and 512, fair and accurate depictions of the anatomy, sort of an inside look at the front and back of an individual.
This is a generally good picture of the normal anatomy, yes.
Okay. And would using 511 and 512 assist you in your testimony as to what specifically you saw inside the body that night?
Yes.
I'm going to request permission to tender and then publish State's Exhibit 511 and 512 demonstrative evidence.
Any objection, Mr. Samuel, to the state using 511 and 512 for demonstrative purposes? No. Okay. They are admitted for those purposes.
Dr. Sellers, if you could, look on the screen in front of you, and let's kind of orient the jury, tell them what we can see here in State's Exhibit 511.
This is an anterior view, meaning you're looking at someone's front side with the skin of the chest wall and the abdominal wall taken away. So you're looking at the internal organs of the chest and the abdomen.
And State's Exhibit 512.
This is the posterior view, or a view from the person's back.
And what can you see sort of in the middle here and then up and down? What is that?
That is the spinal cord.
And what are the sort of notches that we see right off the spinal cord?
These are,
You just have to press real hard and, yeah.
so these are part of the spine, or the vertebral column, that have been taken away in order to give you the view of the spinal cord. These spaces here are the spaces between the ribs. The white things you see are the ribs.
And what are the little notches off the spine itself called?
Spinous processes.
Okay, and the spinous processes, what are those made of?
Bone.
And are they of a hard enough substance to, do they share the same characteristics as the rest of the bones in your body?
Yes.
As you come into the operating room on the still 25th, going into the morning of the 26th, did you know or have any information about where the wound was, the entrance wound?
No.
Were you able to, at your initial part of the surgery, see the exit wound?
No.
At some point in the surgery, did you learn that there was an exit wound on her front side?
Yes, when we finished, we looked at again, the incision had been made by the time I got there, so that part was not visible to me until we closed.
Okay. And so as State's Exhibit 511, consistent with the view that you really had when you came into the operating room?
Generally speaking, yes.
And tell the jurors what, you told them you noticed a lot of blood and damage as a result of the gunshot. What did you do to try to stop that bleeding?
Well, what Dr. Syed had done in the emergency room effectively stopped the bleeding because it kept any blood from going past the point of his clamp, downstream from that clamp, and the area that was injured was downstream from that clamp.
And where was the clamp itself placed?
It was inside the chest cavity, which is why he opened the chest in order to be able to place that clamp.
And where did you place it?
On the distal aorta, just above the diaphragm.
What is, so the jurors can understand, what is the distal aorta? Why is that such an important place to clamp or stop the bleeding?
Well, it's the most accessible. What you want to do with that maneuver is preserve blood flow to the brain and the heart, because those are the two that are least tolerant of not getting blood flow. The abdominal organs can withstand some ischemia or some lack of blood flow for a lot longer period of time than the brain can. The brain is, anywhere from 2 to 5 minutes, certainly no more than 5 minutes, is irreversibly dead without blood flow. So the clamp is put on at that point in order to preserve blood flow to the brain. So the location of that clamp just needs to be downstream from the blood vessels that take off to go to the brain, and that is downstream from those blood vessels.
And do you see on 6 Exhibit 511 the area where that clamp would have been placed?
It's not visible from here because you would have to, if you took all of these organs away, the aorta would be coming down in the back here. His clamp would have been, here's the diaphragm, his clamp would have been here above the diaphragm.
If you can, show the jurors, and if you need to, if it's easier, we can step down and show them, but where is the diaphragm on that picture, and what is that?
I'm having a hard time
If you
putting my
can,
finger where I want to.
You can grab the pointer in front of you and stand up very carefully, don't fall off that ledge there, and sort of point to them where the diaphragm is.
Yeah, thank you. So the diaphragm is this white line goes from left side to right side. This is the patient's right side. So this is the right dome with the right cruise of the diaphragm, or I'm sorry, right dome of the diaphragm here. This is the left diaphragm here.
And how far is the diaphragm, the top sort of edge that we see there from, or how far would it be from a patient's heart?
The heart is immediately on top of the diaphragm.
And can we see that there, 6 Exhibit 511, the heart?
It is this space right here.
Okay, thank you very much. And if I ask you something that requires, it's easier to use the pointer, just go ahead and feel free to do that. Just make sure you keep your voice up for me. And just
Okay,
say,
after my experiment, I think it's easier to do it here.
it's nerve-wracking, I don't want you to fall.
We've tried that.
Okay, and so when you told the jurors about the clamp, once you are actually able to do that, is the next step then to sort of repair the areas that are damaged, that are still bleeding?
Well, yeah, the first step is to make sure that there's not an injury to the big blood vessels in the back. And Dr. Syed had done the maneuver that sufficiently allowed us to say, yeah, no major injuries to the aorta or IVC.
What's the IVC?
And that's the big blood vessel that takes blood from below the diaphragm back up into the heart.
So where was the primary source of damage, and how is it that you saw it there?
Well, we were able to see, it's obvious where at least the general area of injury is, or was, and once we had confirmed that injury to the blood vessels in the back was not an issue, we then explored the area where the injury clearly had, where the bullet track clearly had come, and were able to see that it had transected the blood vessel was going to the spleen.
Okay, when you say transacted the blood vessels, what do you mean?
Had cut them in two.
And the image that we see here on 511, were you able to see the damage just from looking here, or did you have to do some maneuvering?
Well, in order to prove that the damage, that there had been no injury to the blood vessels in the back, Dr. Syed had detached the intestines here and sort of folded them over. And that was not an issue. So the area that we were targeting was because of the source of clear injury, which was in this area in the abdomen.
And the area that you just indicated on 511, is that, do you see the vessels really that would have been affected by the gunshot wound?
The vessels are not visible in these pictures, no.
Okay. Are they on the organ themselves or behind?
They would, and I swear I touched one spot and it lights up somewhere else. You can see a dotted, this actually might be easier to stand. You can see a dotted line here. This is the pancreas. Here, that should say pancreas. The dotted line of the pancreas outlines its body, and it's dotted here because it's behind the stomach, so you can't see the entire pancreas.
Okay, so fair to say if we remove the stomach that we see sort of laying there in front, you can see the whole organ itself. The spleen would actually be larger than the little yellow part we can see there on 511.
Right, the spleen is over here at the tail of the pancreas. This is the tail. The pancreas is here. The blood vessels come out of the aorta, from the aorta, straight out this way. And the blood vessels to the spleen, the artery goes on top of the pancreas to the spleen. The vein comes out of the spleen back towards the liver, right adjacent to the artery, right on top of the pancreas.
Okay. And so damage to those vessels, fair to say that caused a significant amount of bleeding?
Yes.
Tell the jurors why damage to that area of vessels in the body can be, and in this case was life-ending.
Well, part of the issue is in addition to the vessels being major blood vessels, the cavity into the abdomen, or the lining that gave them access or blood access to the lining of the intestine or the lining of the abdominal cavity, had been penetrated by the bullet too. So blood had access to a big open abdominal cavity that wasn't able to keep it contained.
How far was the injury that we were looking at here, and that you just sort of showed us the general area of? How far is that injury from Ms. McIver's heart?
It would be just a few centimeters, a couple of inches.
And if the bullet, I'll straighten out this one question. It states it's in fact 12 again. The exit wound that I asked you about before, that you are able to eventually see after surgery, about where did that exit wound fall on the body on the front side? I'll show you 511 again. I can see it.
It would be immediately in front of, again, I'm going to target this, knowing where it would be in this area here.
And were you able to look at or examine the entrance wounds, or where the bullet came into the body at all?
No.
Did you notice any part of your treatment involve you analyzing or looking at that wound in any way?
From the outside, no. From the inside, we had spicules of bone that we noticed in the bullet track, and in exploring that, we were able to confirm that it had injured at least one of the vertebrae. I couldn't tell which bone in the back, which spinal bone it was, whether it was 11, 12, etc. But it was clear that the bullet had gone through the bone.
And what is it about what you observed that lets you know that a bullet actually did come into contact with some part of the vertebrae?
Because there were spicules of bone throughout the tract and around the vertebra.
Is the substance there on the actual spine itself, and the notches that we talked about before, is that of a substance that's hard enough to potentially deflect the actual wound track itself? Change
Yes.
the trajectory should it hit one of those bones?
Of course, yes.
How long, Dr. Sellers, were you in the OR with Dr. Saeed trying to save Diane McIver's life?
I would expect I was there, I remember thinking about this, we were there probably an hour, maybe a little bit longer.
And at what point is it that you decide that the surgery is not going to be successful, or that your attempts are not working?
After that period of time, but up until that time, we had tried several. One of the things that we had done had been to remove the clamp from the chest, and which was really not very accessible to us as down in the abdomen. But the aorta comes through the diaphragm, obviously, and put up the other. And so if here's the diaphragm, I'm getting better. The clamp put on in the emergency department would be up here above the diaphragm. We're operating down here through a long midline incision here. In order for us to more readily take the clamp off, put it back on, we needed to access the aorta below the diaphragm, which that was actually the first thing that I did once that I got into the operating room, because Dr. Syed had already done the other that we described. But once you have stopped the bleeding, we were able to see where the bleeding was. We put clips on the blood vessels that had been transected or that had been cut, so there was no ongoing blood loss. But since having a clamp on your aorta is keeping the blood flow from your abdominal organs, you have to restore that as soon as you can, as soon as you safely can, which with the blood vessels then control clips on them, it was safe to take this clamp off. So we put the clamp down below, our clamp, took this one off. The reason we did that was so we could have more readily access to that clamp to take it off, put it back on depending on what our blood pressure did. When we were satisfied that all the sources of bleeding were controlled, we didn't want to unclamp the aorta and then have more bleeding, but we put the clamp down in the abdomen so that we could take it off and see what would happen to her blood pressure, because she needed perfusion, she needed blood flow to those organs that were below the clamp or downstream from the clamp. Every time we tried that, her blood pressure would sink, fall so low, so fast that it was not survivable. After multiple attempts of doing that, and again assuring that all the sources of blood loss had been controlled, which included taking out a kidney which had been injured, taking out part of her stomach, taking out the pancreas and the spleen, despite proving that there was no ongoing source of blood loss, every time we would take the clamp off, in very short order, her blood pressure would get so low that it was not survivable. After multiple attempts of this, and after we had sort of lost our confidence that any of the abdominal organs below were survivable at this point, we decided to call off the efforts.
And you told the jury during your kind of explanation of some of the complications going on in the abdominal cavity that there were other actual injuries to the organs you just listed. Correct. And which organs were damaged as a result of, and are these damages from blood loss or damages from the actual trauma of the gunshot itself?
The ones I alluded to were direct damage from the bullet.
Okay. And which organs were those that were damaged from the bullet itself?
The upper part of the left kidney, which is not visible here, but would be, it'd be in this area right here. Again. And the adrenal gland, which is part of that. The pancreas was obviously damaged because it was in the path of the bullet as well. The upper part of the kidney is immediately adjacent to the pancreas. The stomach had been traversed. The spleen, I don't think was injured, but we had taken the blood supply to it, and it was in the way in order to try to, to expose other areas. So it came out as well.
We talked a lot with the jury about blood loss and some of the issues with it. You talked about her blood pressure being low. In a normal human female, about how much blood is contained in the human body?
The normal person is, we'll just say 70 kilograms, and it's about 70 cc's per kilogram, so it's about 5 liters of blood in a normal person. She was a little bit smaller than 70 kilos, so maybe a little bit less.
And do you have an opinion about this gunshot wound, about how much blood or what kind of blood loss we're talking about quantity-wise from what you saw there?
Well, when I got into the operating room, the amount of blood in the abdomen would be what you would expect, would be basically someone's entire blood loss or entire blood volume. Keeping in mind, she would have gotten some transfusions prior to that, so, but there was an extensive amount of blood.
Dr. Sellers, as a result of your experience in surgery, but with this specific surgery, do you have an opinion about the factor of time and why that's important, about how much time someone can continue to function with an injury like the one that you saw here?
Well, I didn't document how many times, but I would guess 8 or 10 times we tried to take the clamp off the aorta. And, you know, in that circumstance, you give everyone every chance you can think of to, until it's just completely unreasonable to continue, which is where we got to. But the time that she had no flow to her abdominal organs at that point would have been an hour and a half, if not more.
And upon sustaining a wound like this, right when the gunshot happens, would you expect a person, or is it consistent with what you know about this injury, that someone might lose consciousness relatively quickly?
Yes.
Why?
Because their immediate blood loss and just the physiologic shock of the injury and the pain. And again, the blood loss keeps you from being able to pump as much blood to your brain because there's not as much in your blood vessels, so your brain is getting deprived of blood flow, which is what keeps us all conscious.
After you and Dr. Saeed and the other individuals in the OR make the call that your efforts are no longer reasonable, at some point do you declare a time of death for Ms. McIver?
Yes.
When was that?
I was told it was 12:45. I did not remember that until someone told me that.
Okay, and did you have access and have you been able to review the medical records in this case as well?
Yes.
Okay, and is 12:45 consistent with sort of your mental timeline of when you would have arrived to the OR and your time there in the operating room?
Yes, as I said, I thought we worked an hour, maybe a little bit longer, and if I got there at 11:30, and that 12:45 would have been about right.
After the time of death, what's the next thing that you do?
Well, we closed the abdomen and the chest wound, since she had a chest wound as well, and then the next responsibility is to inform the family of the outcome.
And why is that your responsibility?
I don't know what to say other than why would it not be.
And who do you do, in your time as a surgeon at Piedmont and Emory, have you had the occasion to deliver that type of news or just generally results of a surgery to families before in your career?
In the setting of deaths in the operating room, very rare, fortunately. But the times that it has been in the setting of trauma, yes. So I've done it before.
Okay. Had you done it before at Emory?
No.
And the time that this surgery came about in your sort of timeline of employment, how long had you been with Emory Hospital?
Not quite. About 3+ months, I guess. Not quite 4 months.
Okay. Who would you have delivered the news with? Would it have been you alone or with Chief Resident Dr. Saeed?
Dr. Saeed and myself would have both felt responsible to do that.
And what's the first sort of step you take to do that so that you can deliver that news?
Locate the family is obviously the first step. And so when we were finished, we said, that's basically what we always say is, where is the family? And that's true whether it's a successful surgery or what.
And what happened next?
We were told that Mr. McIver was downstairs and would...
Objection, hearsay.
For this particular statement, I'm not offering it for the truth. It's just kind of the next step of how it is that he makes it to the next step of his process. But I can shortcut it and get it directly there.
I object to it being hearsay. If it's not being offered for the truth, it doesn't need to be asked at all.
Okay, I don't know that that's always correct, but here I think we can get to where we're going without that piece of information.
I will.
So I'll sustain.
Dr. Sellers, did was in your time from immediately reaching out, trying to contact the family member so that you can deliver this news, and your time where you actually come into contact with that family member, was there a delay of some kind?
There was a little, because one of the things that's relevant is almost always, even at that time of night, the family is waiting in the surgery waiting area. And there was no one in the surgery waiting area.
Eventually, did you come into contact with Mr. McIver?
Yes.
And was he alone?
No.
At the time that he came up to have a conversation with you and Dr. Saeed, did you know who the other person was with him?
Yes. The comments were he wanted to wait for his attorney to get there before he came up and spoke to speak with us.
And when he gets up...
That's hearsay, Your Honor. He's relating what someone else told him because...
Right, I couldn't tell exactly how it was going to play out, but it sounds like comments were, so you all should disregard, ladies and gentlemen, what Dr. Sellers just said. And I'm going to have you structure this a little bit more, just so you're able to get to where you're trying to go without us bumping into this.
Sure.
Okay.
Did you, at the time that you came into contact with Mr. McIver eventually, did you have an understanding of who the other person was with him?
I did.
And when Mr. McIver did come upstairs with the other, who all came upstairs?
Mr. McIver and the security person that was escorting him and the other person.
Okay. Where did you go next?
Into the consult room outside or adjacent to the surgery waiting area.
I'm going to show you State Exhibit 507. What's in 507?
That is the sign outside the door, or next to the door leading into the consult room where we deliver the news.
All right, and just so the jury can be oriented to the layout there, where is this room or the door there on 507 in relation to sort of what you see when you get off the elevators there?
It would be immediately behind the elevators. The view from the front of the elevators before, if you were to go straight to the back of the elevator, would be there.
And once you get off the elevators here and we're looking at what we see in 501, is there a waiting area up there as well?
From this view, the waiting area would be to your right and the back. The elevators are immediately right here to the left, and the consult room would be to the left of that.
So there's another, once you exit these elevators, another set of chairs, general waiting area, in addition to this room in 507, is that correct? What about Stacy's bed, 508?
That is the inside of the room.
It's 508. Once you came into this room, tell the jury what happens next.
Well, Dr. Syed and I were already in the room, and I was standing immediately next to the door, which would be right here. Dr. Syed was standing over here by this chair, and Mr. McIver and his companion came into the room with the security agent, or with the security guard, and the chaplain, I think, was with them, or that she was already in the room. I don't recall that specifically. But Syed took the lead and said, please, Mr. McIver, have a seat. And he was pointing to this chair here. And Mr. McIver, basically before the sentence was able to be finished, he said, "Don't tell me what to do, boy." Which was not in a threatening way, but in an aggressive way, I would say.
And after hearing this comment, did you sort of take over, or what do you all do in response to that?
Well, it caught us, I guess, off guard a little bit. But, I guess at that time, when someone's, delivering this news, and not knowing what they already know, there's maybe a little bit of latitude. You go somewhere in terms of how they act. So we convinced him to sit down and started delivering the news, and basically, without recalling the exact words that we would have used, said that despite all of our efforts, the injuries that she sustained were just impossible to recover from.
And as you're delivering this news, at some point, does the defendant, Mr. McIver, interrupt you?
He does, and there were a couple of notable things that sort of stuck out. One of which was he was sitting with his knees on his elbows and looked up and said, "I'm really trying hard not to lose it," or "I'm really trying hard not to cry." I don't remember specifically, I think, but maybe a distinction without a difference, but he looked up and he said that.
And you remember that?
Yes.
At any point during your conversation with Mr. McIver, start to finish, did you observe any tears?
No.
Did he make any other comments to you while you are attempting to deliver this news or communicate to him what just happened to his wife?
That comment was made after we had paused. We had delivered sort of the news, thinking, now we've said everything we need to say, and give him a chance to respond or ask any questions. And I'm sure we even said, do you have any questions? And then some more conversation ensued, and interrupted this time. He looked up and said, "This is the hardest thing you do, is it?" And I would have said something to the effect, right now I'm more concerned about you than how difficult our job is. And then he went into a description of, because I used to do this in the Army or the military, I forget which service he said, but I used to have to call and tell little Johnny's parents that little Johnny didn't survive. And I remember how hard that was.
And this comment that you just told the jurors about, is that something directed at you?
Yes, looking straight at me.
About how long do you think that you were in the consult room that we just saw there in 508, having that conversation?
10 minutes, 15 minutes.
And after you leave, does that sort of complete your involvement in this particular case?
Yes, other than documenting in the outlook and things like that.
And after you have this conversation and you finish documentation, do you actually leave the hospital yourself?
Yes.
And how do you actually have to go back down to valet to get your car that you left there?
Yes.
Okay. Traditionally, when you come into the hospital in a non-emergency situation, would you valet your car or park in the actual?
No, we're parking in our parking lot and walk across.
I don't have any other questions. Any regrets?
Sandy?
Afternoon, Dr. Settles. My name is Don Samuel. We've never met before, is that right, or talked?
I don't think so, no.
Let's see. With regard to the testimony regarding the efforts to save her life when you were in the operating room, there's no question in your mind that the cause of death was the gunshot, correct?
Correct.
There's no doubt that the bullet entered somewhere in her back, correct?
Correct.
And then caused a great deal of damage, correct?
Yes.
And did I understand you to say that it hit a bone or the bone to the side of the vertebrae and changed course at that point, was likely to have changed course, the bullet changed course, and then exited out the front, correct?
Well, from what we saw in the operating room, I couldn't tell if the trajectory had changed, but I could just tell that it had gone through the bone, yes.
Okay. And I thought when you were asking the assistant DA questions, you said when a bullet hits bone, it is likely to have changed course or will change course.
It certainly can, yes.
Say it again?
It certainly can, yes.
Certainly can. And in reviewing, what you said before to the DA, when you were interviewed earlier and your testimony here today, there were great efforts made by the doctors to save her life, were there not?
That's right.
Both you and your colleague, Blaine Saeed, correct?
And multiple people prior to his involvement, yes.
I mean, we can call it heroic, we can call it great, but it was absolutely fine care, was it not?
As far as I can know, yes.
When you left the operating room and you went towards the room that, bottom right, went to the consult room. There's a consult, a family room downstairs in the ER, correct?
I don't know that, probably.
Okay, and then there's a family room up on the OR. It's kind of the same, the rooms where families sit, correct?
Again, I'm not familiar with the ER arrangement, but certainly in the operating room, yes.
That's what I'm talking about, the third floor.
Yes.
Okay. And at around 12:45 or shortly thereafter, when you leave the operating room, you're still wearing scrubs?
Yes, I would have been.
Okay. And we've all watched TV. I assume everything else about TV is wrong, but at least the scrubs look like they do on TV, correct?
Blue scrubs, and honestly, there was enough time I would have, I can't imagine this would have been the case, but I would have driven in jeans, and I don't think I would have, there was enough time that went by where I could have changed, but I'm pretty sure I would not have done that. I would have been professional.
And when you meet with Mr. McIver and the person he was with, Mr. Maples, is that correct?
Based on things I've learned, I guess maybe between then and now, I would think that's who that was, but I'm not specifically, I don't remember he introducing himself as, I don't remember the name he used when he introduced himself.
Not important. That person didn't coach Mr. McIver or tell him what to say or really have any input, correct?
Correct.
At all?
Correct.
He didn't say, this is what I want you to tell the doctor, or this is what I don't want you to tell the doctor. He was just standing there with Mr.
Not in my presence, correct.
Okay. And then the chaplain was there, correct, Rhonda Jones?
Yes.
Okay. Did she come up the elevator with them, or was she with you waiting for them, or you just don't?
I don't recall, unfortunately, yeah, sorry.
So, and I know this is probably speculation, maybe I'll get an objection, but when Mr. McIver saw you, do you think that you all have a demeanor and, I guess, some bad news for you?
Without their perspective, it's hard to know. We certainly aren't jovial. I mean,
You're
it's...
not coming up like this, coming down the hall like this.
No, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And I didn't mean that facetiously, but it could very well have been the case, based on the way you approached them and talked to them. You need to have a seat. He knew it was really bad news.
I'm going to speculation.
I think it's a fair question.
It's fair, but it's also asking him to guess what folks might have been doing. That's the kind of thing you're free to impart to the jury later.
Yeah. But let me ask it to you this way. Without trying to probe what's in someone else's mind, is your demeanor such that a person could come to the conclusion, I'm about to get some really bad news? That's not
I'll allow that. That's as far as we'll go with this.
We try not to telegraph anything. I mean, I'll say, and the gesture you used a minute ago with your thumbs up, when someone's coming across, in a usual morning, room full of people in the waiting area, and the family member gets up, way away from you, and they're walking your way, if things are going well, I'll do that. That way, that, extra 20 steps, they're not worried to death. Clearly, we wouldn't have done that, but we were waiting in the room when they arrived. So there wasn't an opportunity to telegraph a message one way or the other.
I'm curious, when the encounter with Mr. McIver and the other people and the other person ends, do you leave or they leave? Is he given, let me, if you don't know, well, go ahead and answer.
I don't specifically remember if I would guess what normally happens is we leave the room to let them sit with the chaplain.
With the
and,
chaplain.
yeah.
Do you know whether he was then allowed to go and visit with the decedent?
I've heard since then that yes, but I wasn't aware at the time.
With the chaplain, or the chaplain escorts him into the operating room and he's allowed to just sit there for a while?
I don't know the details of those events, no.
Okay. You learned that that's a typical thing, and you learned it did happen here.
Yes.
You indicated that it's not often that someone dies in the operating room, is that right? So you don't often have the burden of doing what you had to do that evening in the consult room.
Correct.
But you do know that people react differently, correct?
Within standard deviation, yes.
Okay. I'm not a mathematician, but I'll accept that. Even the exact same circumstances with different people would react differently, right?
Well, I mean, no two circumstances are exactly the same, so it's hard to...
I was going to do that next. Even if there was very similar circumstances, two people might react differently.
Again, no two specific reactions are the same, and no specific circumstances are the same, so it's hard to say.
Okay. If someone is the survivor of someone who died of cancer, for example, after a long illness, that's one circumstance, right?
Yes.
Another circumstance would be someone who is the survivor of someone who dies in an unexpected accident, dies suddenly, right?
Correct.
And those people might react very, very differently, correct?
Yes.
And probably a very unusual circumstance, maybe one you've never seen before, would be someone who was the survivor of someone who died suddenly, and that person was at least part of the cause of death.
Well, I'll say there are some...
I'm going to object to speculation as to this line of questioning. I think he's answered it to the best of his ability. Speculation,
I'm okay with the question. You can answer.
Well, I was going to say, there are some components of a tragic loss that are common across the board, across the spectrum. Whether it's someone that died of 5 years battle with cancer versus someone that just died in a car wreck. So there are some things that are common to all, I think, grief, and some things would be situation specific.
Well, but the circumstances of someone dying suddenly and unexpectedly would clearly be different than someone who dies after leaving hospice care, right? Or in hospice care.
I'll disagree with that, sure.
And you learned, I guess, from talking to the brief conversation you had in the consult room that Mr. McIver had been in the military, correct?
He said that, yes.
And told you about the experiences he'd had having to do, at least to some extent, the same thing you were doing, which was telling people about the loss of life.
He was recounting that and how it affected him. I don't remember him saying anything about how people reacted.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I said he was recounting how he was doing essentially what you were doing just then, telling survivors about the death of a loved one.
Okay, yes.
Correct?
Yes.
You could keep this super on point, that would be great. We'll have to get the doctor out here before we have to break for lunch.
Dr. Sellers, you told Mr. Samuel that there are some things that are consistent, that are sort of universally consistent with grief. There are some similarities there for all those experiences.
Yes.
Did you observe any of those things that you would say are universally consistent with grief in your conversation with Mr. McIver?
I did not.
Mr. Samuel asked you about the sort of care that Emory gave and the attempts that you made to save Ms. McIver's life. Tell the jurors, what is a massive transfusion protocol?
It's something that hospitals have in place for circumstances, sometimes in the operating room with unsuspected blood loss, or in a trauma setting where there's a massive blood loss prior to their arrival.
And the injuries that Diane McIver sustained, are they consistent with, would she have been somebody who needed a massive transfusion protocol there in the emergency room?
Yes, well, a lot of blood available in a short period of time, yes.
And is a massive transfusion protocol something that happens on a regular basis at Emory University, the Clifton Road campus?
In the emergency room, no, for sure.
Okay.
And the massive transfusion protocol also, in addition to the red blood cells, which is what carries the oxygen to the organs, are other components of blood that are separated and given separately, plasma and things like that.
You talked to the jurors. Mr. Samuel asked you some questions about sort of your approach to people in general, but Mr. McIver, sort of how you come into the room. In this circumstance, were you already in the room?
We were in the room already.
And that's when you first came into contact, or when Mr. McIver would have first seen you?
Yes.
And so there were not two surgeons in scrubs and a chaplain coming around the corner walking towards Mr. McIver?
Correct.
And did you ever see Mr. McIver sort of look behind him to see who you were talking to at any point?
I don't recall that, no. There was no one behind him.
Did he ever ask, or did anybody ever ask him about seeing a chaplain, or was she already there?
She was there.
I don't have any other questions.
Jurors, if you have questions, ask them to let them down. Deputy Murphy will go ahead. Doctor, did you, during any part of the work you did to try to save Ms. McIver, find the bullet projectile?
I did not.
Are you able to explain to the jurors how there could be an entry and an exit wound, but not much visible external blood loss, if that makes sense? In other words, you found lots of blood, but if the evidence is there wasn't a whole lot of blood in the vehicle where the shooting happened, etc., how should that be?
Sure, yeah, good question. The injury would be to the blood vessels would be maybe halfway between the front and the back. And the track is really small, and the soft tissue will fold in or close in on the track. The abdominal cavity is pretty capacious and expand and accommodate the blood, so the path of least resistance or the pressure inside the abdomen wouldn't be enough to overcome pushing blood through those long tracks that were occluded by the soft tissue that falls in behind the track. So that's not surprising to me at all.
While you were working out of state or at Piedmont, did you ever perform any gunshot trauma surgeries akin to what you were doing on the night in question?
Nothing related to a gunshot. I will say that the training we get in transplant surgery means that transplant surgeons get to this part of the body more than anybody else, even more than trauma surgeons. And the reason we do that is because that's an integral component to doing an organ procurement. So if you're going somewhere to take a liver out or kidneys out to be transplanted, you have to put the clamp on the aorta where we put our clamp. And because of, I've done that 1,000 times, if not more. So because of that, and our familiarity with doing that, we were able to do that as quickly as anyone could have done, I think.
During your consultation with Mr. McIver, did he ever ask you why Ms. McIver couldn't be saved, the medical reasons behind it?
I don't remember that question, no.
During your consultation with Mr. McIver, did he ever offer to you any description or explanation of what led to Ms. McIver receiving the gunshot injury?
No.
You described another gentleman accompanying Mr. McIver for the consultation. Did that person ever ask you any questions, or your colleague any questions?
Not that I recall, no.
Ms. Convery, any follow-up for Dr. Sellers?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Samuel?
No, Your Honor.
All right, Doctor, appreciate your time. You are free to go.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to break for lunch. I got to note that you all have time constraints that keep you from staying late this week. Fully respect that, and we'll work with that. Do we still want to do the 45-minute lunches, or after a few weeks of that and losing too much weight, you want longer lunches? We're good with 45? Let's try to be back then at 1:15. To see if we can get going with the state's next witness at 1:15. Thank you for your time and attention. Enjoy lunch. There's supposed to be a big rally going on up at the Capitol. If you want a little diversion, you can go there. And we'll just make sure you come back at 1:15. Get swept up in the cause.
All rise for the jury. Please be seated.
Mr. Rucker, anything from the state before we break? No. Mr. Samuel? Okay. Let's be back a little before 1:15. Thank you.